It's really a pleasure to be joining this group and part of this wonderful gathering. I'm excited to share the work that we do in my lab. And today I'll focus particularly on the work that we do related to higher education and college contexts. And we run a lot of experiments to uncover different aspects of the student experience and to try to identify the different types of supports from the college environment that can bolster student identities in ways that lead to positive achievement and well-being, especially those from backgrounds that are often marginalized within those contexts. This work that I'll talk about is summarized in a recent paper with Josiah Rosario, a current graduate student, and Shirin Basuji, who's a colleague in the learning sciences at Northwestern. And the sort of big picture, we're really focused a lot in our work on socioeconomic disparities in the college experience and success within different college environments. What we try to lately really engage with directly and provide alternative frames for is the dominant approach, which is often a more deficit-based emphasis on leading students to assimilate within those types of contexts. And our idea that we want to try to put forth in a number of ways is captured by expansive approaches to all different aspects of learning environments, can improve achievement and well-being for all students, especially for those who are often seen as marginalized. And obviously, we're interested in student achievement and how well they can reach their goals. But another part of the status quo that we're really trying to engage with is that even for those students who do move up the socioeconomic distribution and succeed in college, as you can see from this middle line, moving from lower SES to higher SES, part of that experience during college can come with so many of these different forms of identity challenges on the top here, related to belonging and thoughts about your future and the narrative about who you are. And not only can these impact your ability to achieve and to pursue your goals effectively, they also, we find more and more evidence on how these processes are seeping into people's bodies and affecting inflammatory processes, leading to long-term disease development and chronic illness in ways that can harm those students that are seen as most successful coming from economically marginalized backgrounds. So our approach is try to provide the right support so that succeeding academically can be positive for both your health and achievement. And so I'll start first with a summary of a proof of concept experiment that really provides a framework that guides how we try to provide supports across the different college contexts. This is an experiment that was led by Ivan Hernandez, a current doctoral student in the lab. And the idea with this study was that we wanted to, again, counter this narrative about deficits that students have from marginalized backgrounds. And we wanted to see, does it affect students directly when you are provided with a different narrative about your identity that's normally seen as marginalized? It sounds like it should. It sounds like a good idea. But we wanted to use our experimental tools to see if it actually affects students when they think about their identities in ways that they don't often have the opportunity to do. So we randomly assigned, we recruited about 200 college students from across the country to participate in an online study, randomly assigned them to one of two different types of conditions. And in the key condition, which we call the background specific strengths condition, they first had the opportunity to read about and think about how backgrounds that are often seen as marginalized, economically marginalized, racial or ethnically marginalized, actually have a range of different types of strengths in terms of navigating inequality, forming important bonds, and different things to think about as part of that experience. Then they had the chance to write and reflect about those strengths in their own lives. And then we looked at the effect that this might have on them in the moment to get a sense of if this matters for students. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor for this, students randomly assigned to this condition wrote things like, yes, I have these strengths. I grew up in a lower tier. My family is hardworking and diligent. I'm diligent with my time. As a result, it might lead to me being beneficial towards my grades and fulfilling my educational goals. So different ways that this identity and these experiences that can be seen as marginalizing are actually a part of strengths for students. So then we wanted to see, they had students complete a survey to see how this was affecting them once they thought about their identity in this different type of way, at least for the moment. And what we found is that first, they were more likely to actually endorse the idea that, yes, I do have these strengths on a survey that are connected to my background in the background strengths condition compared to those in a couple of different control groups. We also found that they started to think about themselves more positively. They felt that they had more positive attributes compared to if they were in the control condition. And importantly, we're interested in how motivated students are. How do you respond when things get difficult? And how much do you think that when something is difficult, it's impossible for you? So lower scores are more motivation, and those in the background strength condition started to feel more motivated to take on difficult things after getting the chance to think about their identities in this way compared to the control conditions. Okay, so that's our kind of proof of concept study around the different ways of thinking about students' backgrounds. I wanted to run through a couple of studies on how we think it's not necessarily the idea to move from that as this is the intervention that needs to be done, this type of reflection task, but rather this is guidance for how this idea can be translated into all sorts of practices across students' levels of their context in the college environment, from interactions with peers to faculty to the institutional climate. I'll talk about as many of these as I can get through. So first off, we run a study focused on the peer environment. We call this a difference education approach with some colleagues. We recruited students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, and half of them were randomly assigned to watch a panel of advanced college students conveying their experience coming from different backgrounds at the university. And half of them were assigned to hear these students just talking about their regular everyday lives. So in the control condition, the panelists just talked about what they do to be successful, important things for incoming students to hear about. And in the treatment condition, the panelists talked about their connections to relationships at home, different aspects of their background, and how this is connected to their success. And what we found is that hearing that message, if you look at the first generation college students, led them to have a significant boost in their grades by the end of the year, compared to if they were in the standard control condition, these blue bars. And for the continuing generation students, there was no difference on what message they received. And why this mattered is because they became more likely to seek help throughout their first year. If you were a first generation student and you heard this message from third and fourth year students, the difference is actually a strength. So this is just an example showing these messages from peers can be especially important for this particular mechanism. And our takeaway from that, again, is not that this is a program that is the intervention to do, but rather the development of all sorts of community-based scholars programs, bringing together students to emphasize the strengths of their backgrounds can be beneficial in these types of ways, like some that we've run at our institution. Moving on to the faculty level, we also have a student who's been looking at the messages coming from faculty about student strengths and assets. And we developed an experiment where students were going to look at a lecture that was either focused on student assets coming from marginalized backgrounds or control sort of lecture, and then looked at some of the effects of that. And in the asset condition, the message from faculty, the lecture talked specifically about a faculty member recognizing the strengths of students from marginalized backgrounds and getting quite specific about what they saw those to be, versus the control that just talked about their philosophy of teaching and how they care about student success. And what we find is that hearing this, reading this message from a faculty member led students to think that the faculty actually valued their backgrounds, led lower SES students to believe that they could be their full self in the class in these peach bars, seeing the boost in the asset-based condition. It also led lower SES students to feel like they could succeed more in the class. And finally, that measure I showed before, led lower SES students to become less likely to think that they can't do difficult things, that they were impossible. And you'll notice across these findings, there's no significant difference from higher SES students. They're generally doing fine across the conditions, whether the message from faculty was supportive of other students or not. And then also they were more likely to spend as much time as possible on a difficult academic task. The last level and then, again, the takeaway is not that this one particular message is what matters from faculty, but rather developing opportunities for faculty to be part of learning communities like some that we've developed and to continually infuse their curriculum with these types of messages is the takeaway. And then I'll just briefly mention the broader institutional climate where we've done some work as well, randomly assigning students to be exposed to a climate that is focused on resources for lower SES students like financial aid, or a place that's really focused on and emphasizes being a wealthy institution. And what we find is that lower income students have a significant boost in their sense that they can succeed in the institution after they see that this is a place that has supports and cares about and has resources for lower income students, rather than just a place that's wealthy. When in the chilly climate condition, higher income students are feeling more able to succeed than lower income students. We find the same pattern on a measure of their students' sense that they can succeed and that they are implicitly high achieving students. Okay. Finally, again, the takeaway from here is not just that this message about resources matters, but rather that really increased funding for all these types of resources at the state and federal level and access to grants is quite beneficial for students' identities and motivation. And we're thinking about how this connects to a range of different outcomes across various contexts, interacts with other mechanisms. And the big takeaway I keep repeating over and over again is that the implication is not just this specific intervention, but rather that you can embed these types of approaches within contexts in various ways in a number of different practices. Thank you.